Hey everyone, this is Ashik, and I'm starting a brand new series called Ash on the Topic. And for today's inaugurating session of Ash on the Topic, I've got a good friend back from home, Sri Lanka, Asela Vaidya, who has been partnering with me back in the days during my previous role as well, talking immense around very thought-provoked conversation and also a topic that many of us have in back of our heads and top of our heads and across everyone out there. It's around cybersecurity. So Asena Vaidya is no stranger to many out there with his Twitter handle, which I would really encourage everyone to go check it out, especially to be on top of all the security related and the cyber threats and cyber security related conversations and thought-provoked sharing and insights. So today, Asera Vaidyankar, who is a cybersecurity crusader and a futurist, is joining here with us to discuss a little bit more on this particular topic and what is it for the markets around the world and also to the market where I am in currently in Australia. So Asela, let's start off by sharing a little bit about you for the audience to get to know who you are, what made you to think about this, being a cybersecurity crusader, and a little bit about your futurist area of things.
Thank you very much, Ashik. And first of all the best for your brand new initiative. And thank you very much. Very honored to be here and very honored to be speaking with you. That's a very kind introduction you gave about me. I don't know whether you overstated, but just to give you a very little background, I've been in the industry for about a decade and a half now, almost. And I started off as a telco. I started off as a business analyst. And from there, I worked my way up. And technology has always been part and parcel of what I do. And I have been fortunate enough to be exposed to some cutting edge technology uh, in my entire professional years. And it got me thinking, because of certain roles I had to take professionally, it got me thinking of the security and how this usage would impact. And what we really saw was, it's no longer the IT guys that are using cutting edge tech. It's you and me, it's consumers. And then the danger lies in how do we get to use them? What are the risks? What are the inherent dangers? So that sort of, along that path, going down that rabbit hole, sort of made me very passionate about this. Researched a little more, had to manage certain security, and now, of course, I run a consultancy based in Colombo, looking at ACPAC region, and we help organizations look at their cybersecurity posture, helping their cybersecurity strategic thinking, and hopefully we act as a trusted advisor for them when it comes to all matters cyber.
Oh, that's amazing, Asil. And I've seen your work and I've also heard good, amazing feedback even across the social media about the good work you bring in and the thought leadership you bring in. And I think it has been vital, right? I think this whole security has been there from many years ago, but it took a pivotal change and a pivotal point of interest during the COVID, that the pandemic situation in the world, I would say, and suddenly everyone went digital, and we also saw the tremendous amount of cyber vulnerabilities in the landscape of hackers, ransomware to whatnot, and many other jargons where people were like, "What is this? Is this a series of Netflix, or is it something to do with a movie?" So in that context, Asela, where are we today? Is it something that we need to be again having as top of mind, or is it something that is being controlled? What do you see around that?
Excellent segue, an excellent question. And I'll start with where you left off. Basically, when you take COVID, and I'd like to quote your previous employer, Satya, who basically I went into one of the conferences, and Satya said that Microsoft, when COVID hit and everyone started working from home, Microsoft had a 5-year plan in 2020. That 5-year plan got condensed to 5 months, and that's how past the accelerated speed at which digitization happened and digitalization happened. And what happened was, again, that goes back to the same point I spoke about earlier. You had people who were never online before, forced to be online, forced to use online products, platforms, tools. And then you had everyday people, not the IT guys, using platforms, using softwares, using tools for their work, for their play, for their communication, social media interaction. All of that were now based online and in cyber. Because of that, the threat grew exponentially, 2x, 3x, 10x. So I'll just pluck a figure out of the air. If cybercrime was a country, it would be number 3 in terms of size of economy after the United States, China, and then it will be cybercrime. So you're looking at about 20 trillion US dollars. We are expecting from now to about 2025, it's about 10 trillion, mind you. This is not million, this is not billion, this is trillion US dollars. The size of cybercrime and the size of and scale of the threat keeps growing. One more thing I would take is 2 more examples I'll take is the World Economic Forum. Every year they publish what you call the world's risk report, a global risk report, just before their Davos summit, where all the world leaders and thought leaders come in. And consistently, if you take from 2020 onwards, consistently cyber security related incidents have been in the top 10 in terms of the next 2 years as well as the next decade. And that's how much importance they want global leaders as well as business leaders, everyone else, to focus on cyber. Thirdly, Fitch, which is the global rating agency, very rare for them to publish a non-rating related thing. I believe it was November last year, published one saying sovereigns are at risk from wide-scale cyber attacks. So you have a country's sovereign rating, someone like Fitch coming in and saying a country's sovereign rating, a country's central banks could be at risk because of the scale and size of cyber attacks that are happening. So going back, answering your question, the problem hasn't gone away. Probably, I think we've got saturated with attacks and people have got normalized about it, just like we did for COVID at one point. But certainly the threat is there, the threat is large, and threat is always looming.
Okay, so that's interesting. Like you just kind of reflected around cybersecurity. I mean, the threats being a economy, or rather a country, and it being rated as the 3rd after the US and China. Now, if it is that sizable, obviously people don't see it in the in a way of having it as a tangible country, or is it? I mean, you can see it from your naked eye. So, does the government consider these things, or the world leaders around? Do they have any thought leadership around this now that you brought this interesting point?
Excellent question again. What has happened is perhaps during the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen an uptick in policy leadership by global leaders. For example, when President Joe Biden, his inaugural address to the United Nations, that's somewhere in 2021, actually spoke about cybersecurity and the securing of critical national infrastructure, basically the banks, any infrastructure that's connected to the internet, that's ports, that's transportation, so on. There was a reason behind that, but certainly the fact that that figured in part of his inaugural speech says a lot. Again, 2021, 2022, G7 countries, the world's 7 largest economies, they met, they discussed, and for the first time in 2021, cybersecurity, again, infrastructure security was on the agenda. And they spoke about it, and they discussed common frameworks that can be used between those countries on how to handle cyber threats. Certainly, thirdly, we saw that the conflict happening in Ukraine really upped the ante in terms of discussing about cybersecurity in terms of countries that are, part of the global coalition supporting Ukraine, and how their infrastructure is under risk, and therefore they need a common framework to work and to ensure their security. certainly in the corporate front as well. I was fortunate last year to attend the Global Directors Conference as a speaker from Sri Lanka. And we, in fact, participated in a panel discussion where it was a very esteemed panel, where the World Economic Forum head of cybersecurity, President Obama's former national security head for cyber, little old me, and a gentleman from Brazil, an entrepreneur. We all discussed the importance of directors of an organization or the director board giving strategic leadership for cybersecurity. And I think that's probably a matter I would want to discuss with you as well. But certainly the tide is turning. We see a lot of legislation also coming in globally. Organizations are required to inform data breaches. Organizations are required to inform cybersecurity incidents to a watchdog agency, to an operator, to a government sometimes, because governments need to coordinate, because they've realized it's no longer organization-centric, it's no longer IT division-centric. There might be coordinated cyber attacks looking at crippling a country's infrastructure. And that is a danger that dovetails into national security, economic security of that country. So therefore, they want to be on the ball on this. So not where I would like it to be, but certainly globally, we are trying to get there. So some countries are ahead than most. But what I would like, for example, countries like Sri Lanka, medium-scale countries or middle-income countries, there should be some sort of global leadership on this and a global framework on it. It's all good that the United States or the European Union, they would want to do their own frameworks on how to handle it. But countries like us would benefit most if there is a global framework led by probably the United Nations or something like that, that gives guidance and leadership on these matters. And it goes back to the saying, until everyone's safe, no one is safe.
No, agreed. I mean, there's some loophole if no one is safe, right? I mean, there has to be a unanimous vote around how we all come together, united, to make a kind of a significant change in how we look at the scope of securing the data sovereignty is something that is vital. Now, in the context of Australia, where do you see the cyber awareness, the cyber threats, and has this market been considered as most of a vigilant country in terms of the cyber threats?
So what has happened is Australia's probably, I would say, if you put it into traffic light, Australia's cyber risk posture has perhaps gone from an amber to a red, probably in the last 12 months or so. Why do I say that? Is because if you roll the clock back, you had significant data breaches like the Optus data breach and the Medibank data breach. Then very recently you had the Latitude Financial data breach. So you see a cascade effect of those data breaches then reaching other organizations. Because what happens is, Ashik, let's say you start with the Optus breach, there is a ton of data, personally identifiable information on you and me, if you're part of that data breach, that is available in the dark web. And what happens is that sort of stimulates more cybercrime around it, because if you have your PIIs, then probably your email addresses, your physical addresses, that can be sold. Then potential malicious actors can use that to maybe launch ransomware attacks, steal your identity, steal your financial information, and so on and so forth. So we see this cascading effect that's happening, so much so that the Minister for Cybersecurity, Mr. Claire O'Neill, has declared that Australia will be taking leadership in combating ransomware across borders, as well as she has toughened the laws around reporting as well as cybersecurity in the country. So you see a government response now, at least a proactive government response to the threats. And I was not like yesterday or so, she had mentioned that we are expecting more attacks. So certainly the threat is not gone away. And obviously this much of data for Australians being in the dark web is a matter of concern. And it's not going to just get better immediately, but it will eventually if the necessary steps are taken. But to answer your question, yes, I would say there's a heightened risk right now, especially in Australia, given the sheer amount of breaches and organizational vulnerabilities that we are seeing.
Okay, and does it mean that there's not much of a good control around the security posture for the corporates, the government? Is that what I'm getting from that response?
I would say there needs to be more, because I think
Okay.
organization wide, perhaps it all depends, Ashi, because now, for example, for an enterprise, the amount of controls that you can exercise and the amount of budgets that you have, is significantly higher than, let's say, you're an SME, which you,
Yeah.
however, if you're in a cyber incident, if you're an SME, you're disproportionately impacted. Because you don't have that much of control, you don't have that much of awareness, you don't have dedicated staff to look at cybersecurity, because that is not your core business. So because of that, we see the vulnerability being more. And of course, don't forget, some of these SMEs are vendors or supply chain, part of the supply chain for large organizations. And we have something called a supply chain attack, where the bad guys look at a big organization. If they really want to infiltrate it, they look at the smaller vendors around that organization to see if those guys can be infiltrated, thereby infiltrating the large organization. So you would see this type of thing happening. And given the buffet of personal data that's available, it's always, a sysadmin of company X, personal data could be available online. A CEO of company Y's personal data could be available online. Somebody's medical health records could be available online, which can be used for blackmail purposes. So there's so many different social engineering angles that can be taken, which amplifies organization risks. So it's not that, perhaps it's not as secure, but it's sort of heightened awareness is what's required now. Because we are, like I said, we're not in amber state anymore, especially when it comes to Australia. You're in a red state. So when you are in red, your readiness posture should differ. And that's perhaps the message I want to give organizations, especially based in Australia.
Okay. Now, coming to that point, I have another question. So we have seen many organizations invest in cybersecurity tools and services. As we speak, I'm sure many of them are taking those routine checks, investing, and yet even the Fortune 500 companies are not immune from hacks or breaches. So why do you think this is happening?
The weakest link is the human. I mean, not to degrade the human operator here, but see, for example, let me take an example. The Uber hack. Now, Uber is a Fortune 500 company. You would expect very decent security in a company like that. But what happened is one of their security engineers were phished. They were social engineered. And that was the hole they poked through to get admin access. And these guys could traverse through the network and get admin access. So what the message I want to, yes, people have tools, people have platforms. And what really happens is when something like this occurs, generally management wants a quick fix. They turn to their CIO or their IT leadership and say, guys, buy a box, buy a tool, get rid of it. So unfortunately, cybersecurity is not that. You can't just buy your way out of it. And I think most organizations sort of try to go on that posture. And this is where I would, as an advisor, I would tell them, listen, take a step back. Sometimes it's cheaper than buying a box for X amount of dollars. Probably 1/3 of that you can spend teaching people how to prepare for phishing or running a phishing simulation on your entire frontline staff or your senior management and gauging an idea. Or maybe talking to the senior management and running a drill on cybersecurity and asking them, guys, are we really ready? IT teams are ready. They have their playbooks. They have probably what they need to do. But as an organization, are we ready? Because this sort of organization-wide approach is what's needed for cyber. And you need to speak in one voice when it comes to cybersecurity. And this disconnect is what I see most of the time, because you're trying to buy your way out of it. Also, unfortunately, cybersecurity is a very competitive space in terms of vendors and SIs. And you sometimes see vendor-driven decision making or vendor, coerced decision making, which is not advisable to an organization. Sometimes it's overkill. That's why I say sometimes, you buy something that's overkill for you, but
Exactly.
maybe you can spend that money more optimally, getting the staff ready, because there's always three pillars, Ashik. There's people, there's process, and there's technology. There is no point just focusing on one pillar and leaving the other two pillars hanging. And I think this is why it needs to come from the top. And I spoke before as well. It
Exactly.
needs to come from management, and management needs to have an understanding. And more than management, even the board, if it goes to that level, board needs to have an understanding about cyber, the threats, and the risk profile of the organization, and the cyber risks they face, and how much are they willing to accept, how much are they willing to mitigate.
Okay, so you're definitely mentioning that it has to be a board level discussion and they have to be part of the strategy and the conversations. Yeah,
We have seen globally, the more the boards and the senior leadership is involved in the decision making and their awareness is high, we have seen
okay.
the threat is mitigated more. And there is a correlation. So it always makes sense to perhaps spend money to make sure the board is updated, the board is aware, and the board has expertise available for them. We are not saying boards to become cybersecurity experts. Perhaps, this is what we do. We speak to boards most of the time and we demystify for them. We don't use technical jargon, and we say, this is the threat you're facing. This is your organization. This is the amount of records and data that you're sitting on. If it goes out, consumer trust is affected. Your brand image is affected. Plus, you will have compliance related complications. And those are things management and boards understand. Compliance, they understand. Risks, they understand. Financial issues, they understand. Brand value, they understand. So I think what's required is to demystify that and make sure they understand. And that makes decision making more easier. That makes it the downline, when you go down the organization, the cyber guys or everyone to work together to prepare as an organization, that becomes very much frictionless if you have the board on your side.
Okay, now there's a interesting question that I want to bring, and I'm sure you may have a twist to that answer, but let me start with a small example. Now, when you and I or anyone out there who looks into buying a good car, a family car, and if you're with kids, we will always look into the safety of the car, like, whether it has got the safety brakes, whether it has all the sensors, it has the reverse camera, the seat belts, and for even a baby seat, whether it has that ISO fix seat belt and whatnot. Now, usually car manufacturers looks into all the security in terms of the safety of their passengers, and that's how a car is being made and then put to the market after testing. Now, in the sense of technology, which is especially in the solution space, and it could be even in the level of hardware. Now, the question many IT officers and even at certain CXOs in the board discussions, they bring the question saying, hey, I'm investing on a software. Isn't it that the software vendor's duty to make sure that solution has to be safeguarded? Then comes the question, why do I need to buy this particular solution? And in order to protect that solution, I need to buy an additional vendor's solution on top of it as a security posture. And it may not even be answering that particular area, but I have to invest on few other vendors. I think you touched base a little bit on that. So that dilemma of what needs to be done, am I choosing the right solution? And why do I need to have multiple solutions to safeguard one? Is always a question that many stumble upon. What is your take on it? And is it also part of the vendors? I think their forte that they need to consider this when they talk to the customers.
Okay, interesting question. I like the approach you took it. So I'll start with the car. You choose that car because it goes back to what is the acceptable risk for you. If you have a kid, you're going to look at a family sedan, you're going to look at all the features, you are going to make sure that car is safer than most. But if you're on a budget and you just need a car, you'll buy a car with less security, would you not? Because the argument would be, listen, it's cheaper, gets the job done. Yeah, so it has one airbag. I don't need four. It has well, the ABS in the front too. I don't need the back, whatever. So what happens is you cherry pick and you compromise, and it all comes down to, and then, how can a vendor, because it's competitive space, the vendor also, not inadvertently, but the vendor also is trying to compete in that space. So this is why I say the onus is on the organization to understand what type of car you want, and are you willing to spend on a less secure car for a better price or a budget price, or more secure car which has more features that keeps you secure, because that's the risk the vendor is taking, or here the driver is taking. So yes, then same way you can ask, why are there less secure cars? but it's competition, it's price point, it's trying to match everybody's requirements, and this is where it shouldn't be a vendor driven discussion. I mean, vendors can do so much. You have big companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google. These guys don't know the vulnerabilities in their codes. We call it 0 days. There are vulnerabilities in their line of code which they don't know about. Basically, that's weaponized and that's sold. That's the entire black market out there. I've been to these dark web forums. They're actually selling 0 days, and the minimum 0 day actually goes at about, now it's about $100,000, $200,000 minimum. And goes up to millions. So this is the new nuclear weapons of the cyber age, 0 days. So imagine those kind of companies with engineering talent like that, with the tools and everything at their disposal, they still have vulnerabilities. So they're also trying, but of course, you take the other vendors and products out there, they're trying to compete, and they're trying to match the organization's requirement probably to their budget. And I know the B word is a frowned upon word, but most of the IT decisions, because they are seen as cost centers, and I think this is where the focus, the strategy needs to shift from looking at IT as a cost center,
Yeah.
adding
Correct.
no value to the organization, who's just there to make sure things are humming along, to a strategic partner for the organization and a competitive advantage in this day and age, where people are looking for trust and safety in what they do. It could be an e-com site, it could be a medical supplier, it could be an SME. It doesn't matter. People are looking for trust and safety in this digital world, because everywhere they look, they see dangers. So probably investing in those dual airbags and all of that will come back to you as value generated to the company in terms of revenue. And this is what we are trying to articulate also to non-IT management when that conversation comes along.
Yeah. And I think you and I worked on these previously as well. And for those who are watching this, it's also very good for them to consider what I would say is having a consultant around the cybersecurity workspace for them to do an assessment internally, so that they also know whether they're investing on the right tools, whether they need to invest a little bit more to safeguard, because today we are in the digital age. An entire economy can be brought down by a single hack, is where we are at today. I mean, which shouldn't ever happen. But then again, that is where we are at. And it's more or less a cyber warfare. And to the point you just mentioned, we should not look into as a cost-cutting mechanism, but looked into a refined cost center for us to reinvest and reharvest some of our cybersecurity practices for those organizations. So it's a very valid point. It comes to another question, which is also out there. We have seen the GRC atmosphere change drastically in the past few years of the cybersecurity. How will this impact organizations, and if it is relevant even by a country like Australia?
Well, certainly, and I think Australia is a perfect test case to show how a heightened cybersecurity climate or risk climate actually results in more regulations coming in. And we've seen, for example, Minister Claire O'Neill going in Australian Parliament and saying that they need to tighten the laws. They need to tighten laws around breach notifications, because I believe at the time when the Optus hack happened, Optus was excluded from the disclosure. Immediately registration was bought and telcos were included. So this is a immediate reaction to the climate of the heightened risk. And certainly we've seen so many other initiatives that have happened that tighten the GRC space. And this is what's happening even in the US. We see the same thing. The US very recently published its own national security strategy. The US now requires sort of a technology audit for organizations to actually say what are like the bill of materials, what are the vendors that you have within your organization, because the idea is the CISA, which is the cybersecurity agency in the United States, if one vendor is compromised, like it happened in SolarWinds, they can inform all the organizations, by the way, in your bill of materials, this guy is your vendor, and therefore you need to take immediate reaction to it.
Okay.
So the regulatory atmosphere has certainly changed in the last 3 years or so. And because of that, the organizations, I would say GRC posture needs to mature. Whereas those days it was perhaps a very passive thing, tick the box, just make sure, dot the I, cross the T, and it's done, to now being very proactive about it, being perhaps before the regulator even looks at you, to have internal mechanisms in place to ensure that you have that controls on yourself. Because right now it's not if, it's when an incident occurs.
Correct.
And when that occurs, do you have your contingencies? Do you have your plans and all of that ready? Not only because your customers would be concerned, but now the regulator will come knocking down your door and say, hey guys, what have you done to make sure that you've done adequate precautions? And I think if you take most of the global legislations around cybersecurity, they always ask organizations, have you taken adequate precautions? That's a very wide interpretation.
Yeah, exactly.
When a hack occurs, you may say that if an employee being negligent, maybe why didn't you have 2FA enforced for everybody? You have not taken adequate precautions. So these are the questions that might come back to you in terms of the regulator questioning you. And that's going to be impacting the organization. Like I said, brand image. Will you lose customers because of that? Now, it's not just a fine.
Yeah.
The act of a regulator identifying that you are lax then has an impact on the customer. The customer feels, is my data safe with these guys? I have been with these guys for X number of years. Maybe it's time to pull out. And I've seen a lot of Australian customers after certain incidents. They say, oh no, I'm going to take my business somewhere else. And that's the real dollar impact, Ashik, that hits you. So GRC climate closing in, I know organizations look at it in a very negative way, but I would say it's just making sure the atmosphere is safe for anyone. And also, if you have maturity within your own organization, the external environment's GRC shouldn't worry you too much.
Okay.
And it's about making this part of your culture, making this part of your values, making this part of the goals within your organization. It's that baked into that level. And I feel this is where HR needs to come in. I honestly feel it's a very controversial take. A CISO has to be an HR guy, not even an IT guy. The CISO has to be because he has to convince the people. And who better than HR guy to convince people?
So I see the marriage between the CSO and the HR now coming forward. But I think you have a very valid point. Yeah, correct. It's all about influencing the people with the right mindset about how this has to be looked into. Correct. Yeah.
And if I may interject one more thing,
please go ahead.
Most of the time, and I think we spoke about spending, we spoke about the GRC climate, but if you ask companies, do you know what you're protecting? And this is the first question I ask if I'm in with any board. Do you know what you're protecting? Because there's no point, protecting your front door when there's an unlocked back door.
Exactly.
So you put the CCTVs, you have dogs in front, you have infrared scanners, all of that. There's an unlocked door in the back, which can get to your data. So you really need that audit of what you need protecting. Your assets, your digital assets, your cyber assets, where they are, where they lodge. And this is the danger, because you have governments coming in, you have organizations who have scattered the data all over the place. And data privacy there's a big push now for data privacy globally.
Correct. Yeah.
Because of that, you have to be very careful not to display any negligence with people's data. And if you show that there is an unattended DB somewhere that's open and you had no idea that it existed, and from that your data has got breached and you get to know in the news that your customer's information is out there, there's nothing much you can do, and no one else you can blame but yourself, because you didn't do that audit of yourself to find out where your assets were.
No, that's a very valid point. Like, there's no use of any hardware protection or even these locks when the invisible attacker is right there under your nose tip through a back door. I mean, you nailed it to the point. Now, almost coming to the end, but I have this one question, and obviously we would love to hear from you some of your key takeaways for the audience out here, especially for the organization, what they need to look into. But let me start with the question. Does this cybersecurity term or the tools that needs to be used, does it need to be only for the corporates who are large in size, who are really contributing in terms of a massive revenue to the economy, or is it should be looked into from a organization being a 1 employee, 2 employee, or even the smallest organization out there? What is your take on that?
You hit the nail on the head. The smallest organizations have the most disproportionate risk. The 5 employee organization who's very has a load of data sitting on a cloud drive on a spreadsheet is far more vulnerable than probably an enterprise that probably has a dedicated team to look at it, and there's a SOC there and so on and so forth with all the words of the alphabet. But then the impact also, when it does occur, will be disproportionate. Sometimes they may just completely go out of business, whereas a large organization perhaps can take the hit. Last time I checked, Optus is not bankrupt, despite going through a large breach. But if it happened to an SME, certainly it would have been devastating for them. But that doesn't mean, Ashik, and this is where I think people, especially the SMEs I've spoken to, had an opportunity to speak to global SMEs all over the world, and they fear the investment because they think it's big dollars. And this is where I assure them, no, it's not big dollars. I think a lot can be done in awareness and just making sure people are aware, because these guys are so busy when, especially an SME, cyber is not on the top of your mind. Risk or ensuring the protection of your digital assets is not the top thing of your mind. You're trying to grow your business. Economy is contracting, so certainly those pressures are on the top of your mind. And having that conversation, maybe having somebody just you can talk to and demystifying some of these things helps a lot. And I've done sessions, we call it cyber clinics. We sit down with SMEs, we tell them these are the threats that are out there. Just the mere fact, after that session, their awareness is heightened and they know that there's something out there, probably helps mitigate 50% of the risk immediately, because they're immediately going to change their passwords. They're immediately going to probably do some cyber hygiene practices. They're immediately going to sometimes enable 2FA, which they hadn't before they had a chat with us, because they were not aware. They're immediately going to have a password manager. There are sometimes, for certain organizations, I work with human rights defenders, journalists, and lawyers. So what I tell them is, listen, buy a hardware security key. You don't have to think about it. So doing that step immediately makes their risk probability go lower. Their security is heightened, and just a matter of having a chat. And these are not large investments. Certainly, there are certain configurations. I mean,
right.
O365 itself has certain security configurations. They're very straightforward. If you enable that, you are more secure than most. And in this game of cybersecurity, I always say it's not about not getting hacked. It's being secure than most. And if you can do that, you're all right. And all right is in short supply right now.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks for really sharing that. I mean, it doesn't matter how small any organization out there. If you're an organization who is managing with data and who is also running a business in any form or services for that matter, it's definitely an eye opener for you all as well. So yeah, thanks a lot, Aseda. Now comes to the close actually, and we would love to hear from you maybe the top 5 things that any organization, any individual for that matter, because I'm sure many of us who works at our professional qualifications and even at our home stay, being at home, we are also prone to getting attacked. What would be the top 5 things from a cyber security space you would want to leave us with?
Okay, that's thank you. That's an excellent question. Passwords. A lot of the internet is still built on legacy authentication. So
Okay.
unfortunately, for all of us, we will have to live with passwords for the foreseeable future. So password hygiene is very important. If you can't do all of these things, and if you're recycling your password in different places, you should probably stop doing that. That's number one. Number two, if remembering all these passwords is a chore, and for most people it is, get a password manager. There are free versions out there, there are paid versions out there, but it's less than a cup of coffee for a month. Make that investment and make sure you're safe, because the financial impact of your financial information getting shared or exposed is far higher than you paying a cup of coffees worth every month. That's one. Number two, like I said, if not when, backup. So 3 backups, preferably 1 cloud, 2 devices, 1 with you all the time, 1 in a different location. So that at least if you are suffering an issue, there's ransomware or something like that, you can get back on your feet sooner than most.
Correct.
Update your devices. I know most people don't do it. They see the update, they ignore or dismiss. Why? And they're like, I don't have time for this, but you have time to download a Netflix movie. The point is, like I said, big companies that are far bigger, trillion-dollar companies, have vulnerabilities in their code. When they find it, they send you a patch and they expect you to patch.
Correct.
Simply because your device is then safer than most. And I think this is the operating rule we are going here. You should be safer than most. So patch whenever you have the opportunity. Social media, overshare. That's something I raise with a lot of people. If I do a reconnaissance, and I do this when I do sessions, I just do a reconnaissance on someone, and I say, okay, this is your name, this is your mom's name. I'm sure, if I look enough, I'm sure I'll find your mom's maiden name. This is your dog's name. This is your wife's name. This is your birth. This is your anniversary. These are your kids. This is where they go to school, so on and so forth. The point is, those are all personally identifiable information. And this is why we say, when you're using passwords or something like that, make sure it's something random. I'll give a good example, like chicken, beer, cricket, toast. Chicken, beer, cricket, toast is a far better password than anything you would put, like your dog's name or your mom's name or your anniversary or birthday or anything like that, because it's something you can remember off the top of your mind and it's long enough. So that's something. And I think if you're working from home, especially, it's one little tip. Look at your router. And when they install, when the broadband guys come, they install the router and go change the router's default password. I know most of us just don't bother.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Because listen, most of the time, it's not a manufacturer's fault, like we said, but most of these default passwords, if you enter the model number, we can find it out. And there's enough and more ways the bad guys can find out the model of the router you're using to connect to the internet. And especially if you're working from home, I would really urge you to change that password to something a little more complicated. So that's where it is. And I think we need to build a bigger tent in terms of cyber hygiene. For example, some time ago, Ashik, we used to say, don't write down passwords. But then even my view of that changed when I worked with elderly people who are running an SME.
Agreed.
Who can't be bothered, who are probably a little bit digitally challenged, digital literacy is challenged. Right. So for them, I say, you know what, it's fine. Write it down, keep it in a safe space. That's better than you reusing the same password over and over again. So certainly little things, and this is why we sit down with the organization. We try to customize and bespoke it to how it fits their needs. But some of those things I mentioned are important, and always be suspicious. If something is too good to be true, someone sends you that you won $1 million, chances are you haven't. Someone wants to send, some lost relative of yours wants to send you money, chances are it's not. A package is coming to you, which you never wanted, chances are it's not coming. So trust but verify. So make sure that you have that little tinge of suspicion when something does come along. That'll go a long way.
No, thanks a lot, Asel. I think you opened up quite a few thought-provoking things that every one of us have to really consider. I'm sure many organizations out there have always, but definitely this context around a little bit of the deep dive we did earlier would definitely gain some knowledge out of it. Again, thank you very much, Asela, my friend, for joining this first inaugural session of Ash on the topic. And for those who are watching, thank you very much, and keep subscribing with us at Ashik Niaz on my YouTube channel. And obviously do follow Asela Vaidyalankara on his Twitter handle. He's always active. I must say, I don't know how he makes time for it, but that shows his true passion around cybersecurity, and he's doing it for us. Actually, I'm learning some things and a lot of things out of that, even to help protect myself from my own personal data, and even at what the job that I'm doing to help better serve my customers. So with that, thank you very much, and hope to catch you on the next topic. Cheers.
Thank you, Ashik. Cheers.